Okay, we're going to bring it back to the council for discussion. Councilmember Schwartzman and Vice Mayor Young.
I need you guys to indulge me. I need to ask a couple more questions about the orange dots. And the first thing is I'm going to need you to, unfortunately, to pop that up if you can. I need you to literally point out where the orange dots are. It's really important to me.
Okay, I didn't quite.
I need you to point out where the orange dots are because I have a couple of questions about them, but I need to know where they are. I'm sorry, but thank you for doing this. Okay, so just the orange dot. There's one there on the western side, and that, am I correct that that is down East 2nd Street just off 780? So by the gas station. Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, second. Okay, so there's 3 of them. Okay, and can you tell me, are they fence line up in the air? How high up are they?
They are about 12 or 15 feet in the air.
Okay, and
So, I'm sorry. What you need to do is have the answers in the microphone, and so.
Thank you.
I apologize. That makes perfect sense.
Right.
Thank you.
The record will show what you were pointing at, so we'll be clear. But could you re-answer the question that Councilmember Schwartzman asked?
Yes, they are about 12 to 15 feet above the ground.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to confirm that your intent is to add telemetry to those 3 stations, and then that information, if I'm correct, will also be available online to real time?
Yes, real time.
Okay, last question on those. Then your intent is to have those in, I think, in the November timeframe also?
Yes.
Okay, thank you on that one. And so that means to me, it sounds like we will have online real-time 3 community monitors come November. And then the possibility of a 4th, meaning the green dot, okay, not knowing exactly specifically where, and I don't know when. So the where we're going to have to leave because I don't know the answer. But is the intent to that also to be up and running in the November timeframe?
The intent is to close the gap that the council has expressed a concern about, which is that region of our buffer zone. The
Okay.
technology choice is something we need to work out because
Okay.
of the topography.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
Can we remove that?
I'm done with that. I don't know if anybody else
The
is
other
going to
members
need it.
need the, okay.
Why don't you leave it up there, please?
Pardon?
Can you leave it up there? There
Yes.
might be other questions.
All right. Ms. Tinfo, so part of what the issues have been, aside from the monitors, is communication, evacuation plans, that kind of stuff. Can you help us all understand how things have been progressing in these last few weeks, and what's your take on it?
Sure, happy to do that. Well, the evacuation plan, the staff had already been working on that even before the ISO came to the council, so that's in process. And we'd be very happy to have Valero as a partner in that, but of course there's way more in terms of hazards in town to address, so it's broader than that, and we're working on that. I can tell you that the day after the council meeting, Don Wilson from Valero reached out to me and invited me to come to his staff meeting, which is the equivalent of our executive team meeting, the next day. I was not able to attend then, so he invited me the following week, and the fire chief and I went. And they expressed then their understanding of the council's direction and their intent to meet the November deadline. They acknowledged that there are a number of challenges that they are facing, including permitting requirements from BACMUD and from us. And they still say that they are going to be able and are very focused on meeting that deadline.
So communication's better.
Yes.
Evacuation plans being worked on. Okay, thank you. So, well, first of all, when this whole subject of this coming back to tonight came up, I was really irritated because there was definitely a council majority did what they did at the last meeting, and it's kind of like It seems like the last 2 meetings, okay, we've had stuff come back, and here we are at 11:30, and I don't know when we're going to get done, and it really irritated me because council had already spoken. However, I'm actually glad it came back tonight, because now we got a lot more clear information from the Valero side of things as to not only what happened, what the response on the PG&E, what some of the things are taking place to try to assure that it won't happen again from the power side. Earthquakes aside, I know that's an issue, but we need to talk about that. But we actually have 3 community monitors in place now, in addition to 100 monitors, in addition to new fence line monitors. So we all want monitors. We have monitors. We're going to get more monitors, and we're going to improve so that the 3 community monitors that are existing are actually going to provide real-time information to the community. And it looks like we're going to get a 4th community monitor. So all of that being said, I'm exactly fine where I was 3 weeks ago when we had that last vote. And I'm still supportive of giving them time to get this stuff implemented by November, because if comes November it's not done, I already am on record, I will absolutely not have a problem at that particular point, okay, to move forward on the ISO.
So I want to follow up with Councilmember Schwartzman's questions, and I don't know who wants to answer them. It's regarding the air monitors. So what's the difference between fence line monitors and community monitors, generally referred to as community station monitors?
In particular, what we have, the community monitors are H2S and SO2, and the open path fence line monitors are benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, xylene, or BTEX, as well as H2S. They do not look at SO2.
And in terms of the air quality issues, the ambient air quality issues, there are several other components that are measured. Is that correct?
I believe that's the full scope of the measurements in these particular monitors. Are you talking about the ambient air open path?
Yes.
Yes, as specified by the Air District. That's the technology they chose. They could have chosen a point monitor, but they specified the technology of open path.
So the orange dot ground level community monitors fulfill the purposes of measuring ambient air quality for the Air District.
For H2S and SO2, that's correct. Those have been operational for decades per the Air District regulation.
Okay, and NOx?
NOx is measured at the stack. For compliance purposes, it's measured in the stack.
So there's no measurement of NOx within the community?
Not that I'm aware of.
And NOx is known as a major component to asthma?
I don't know that to be true.
Well, I don't know if you want to trust my word for that, but that in fact is what the literature says. So we don't have any measurement of the major aspect of the NOx in the community. And I think I saw a reference that Valero is in the top 3rd producer of NOx. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. We are among
You want
the
to correct
lowest.
me?
Yes, we are among the lowest emitters of NOx of all the refineries because of the most stringent limits, including our flue gas scrubber. But furthermore, the greatest source of NOx in our community is mobile sources.
Right, and so and I agree with you, and so part of the issue is the marine traffic and the freeway and the trains and all that. So part of the purpose of the community air monitors is not to single out Valero, which is implied, but it's not actually part of the issue. It's part of the city really understanding what it is that the air that they are breathing, and that is the value of that is one of the values of the Industrial Safety Ordinance in Contra Costa. So I have another question that came up earlier. Hold on to check my notes. So actually, I think you covered all of those questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor.
Vice Mayor Young?
So there's been a lot of discussion, both pro and con, on whether or not we ought to have an ISO. But that's not the thing that's in front of us tonight. Correct. We're not voting on an ISO tonight. The question is only, should we direct the staff to consider the draft ordinance that's been prepared by the working group? When we talked about this back in June, the staff report said that they did not do an analysis of the proposed ISO because they had received it only a few days before, which is a reasonable response. But the options they gave us at that time included, well, if you really want to do it, we'll hire somebody and we'll start from scratch. And that's the part I had a problem with, because it seemed to me a much simpler and quicker response was, well, let's just review what's in front of us. Let's not start all over again. So I'm not sure why that was not included as an alternative in the staff report. But now we're a month later, and so there is time to have reviewed it, but that wasn't the purpose of this item tonight, so they get a pass on that. However, if we were to approve the reconsideration, then there would be plenty of time to review the ordinance that has been proposed and analyze it for completeness, legality, whether it is in fact duplicative of existing regulations. And we could then, on October 2nd, which I guess is the time it's supposed to, something that's going to come back, next regular meeting, full council on October 2nd, we would be ready at that point to at least have had an analysis done. And at that point, we could talk about, well, is this something we want to proceed with or not? But the option that is in front of us tonight is simply, do we want to proceed so that we have the full information, or are we just going to say no tonight, and that would be the end of it? It seems like a fairly simple ask, and I'm not sure what the argument is against having more information and having I know we're sort of going to rehash these same arguments, and I don't really look forward to that if it goes forward in October or November. But I think there was lots of things that happened in June that did not fully reflect or analyze what was in front of us. And for that reason, I'm going to support the motion, or the request.
Councilmember Hughes?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming, both sides of the issue. This is the second time we've had you late at night in the chambers, and we appreciate you staying. That said, let me start by saying, those of you, I think, that know me well know that I don't get too frustrated or annoyed with too many things. At least I don't verbalize them. But I am going to a little tonight, because I was very annoyed and very frustrated and disappointed with the mayor's request for the rehearing. I think it was uncalled for, based on what Councilmember Schwartzman said. We already had 3 votes on it. I thought what she was asking for is another bite at the apple, which I didn't think was fair. And I personally don't think that the arguments that were written, were provided in the write-up, warranted a rehearing. Most of what I read was personal opinion and conjecture. I argued my case with the city manager and with the city attorney to no avail, but that's the way I feel. Now, obviously, there's people in this room that feel differently about that, but that's the way I feel. The question before us on June 19th was straightforward. The question was, do we want to direct staff to move forward with the development of an ISO? And part of that, obviously, would have been the review of the draft ISO. I voted no on that issue that night, and I'm voting no again tonight for the exact same reasons. I looked at I initially, way back when, looked at Program 3, State's Program 3, and then looked at Program 4, even met with Kathy Carriage and Andres Soto, and we talked about the comparison. Program 4, the state's program, it essentially mirrors, in fact, it was modeled after the Contra Costa ISO, and in most cases, many cases, it's more strict than the Contra Costa ISO. I then looked at the draft ISO that was presented and compared that to Program 4. And there were some gaps, and we identified those gaps last meeting, or on the 19th. And the gaps were, that I remember, were an evacuation plan is not called for in Program 4. But in talking with city staff, they're working right now on an evacuation plan, not just on a Valero incident, but on any emergency that might take place that would require us to evacuate the town or parts of the town. So that's being addressed. The community monitoring was another issue, not necessarily addressed in Program 4, but it was included in the draft ISO, and we've talked about that. And part of the expectation that we communicated to Valero is that when you come back to us, when we get to November, the expectation is you're going to have fence line monitoring installed, and we're going to be on our way, and it sounds like we might already be, on community air monitoring. And then the last was the communication gaps that we have between the city and Valero. And I agree. I said it earlier. I think it has not been good. It's been better in the past, and then we kind of just, it fell apart. And the May 5th incident certainly didn't help things. But it appears already that there's been a concerted effort on both sides, on the city's part and Valero's part, to mend those fences and to increase or improve the communication. I am not, I heard somebody say they don't believe that there's redundancy in the Program 4 and the Program 4 and the draft ISO, or Program 4 and Contra Costa's ISO. There absolutely is. Anybody who took the time to put them side by side, you'd have to reach the same conclusion that it's duplicative. Now, it's not exact, but it's duplicative. And what I don't want to do, so the question that the Vice Mayor asked is, why wouldn't you? What's the argument for not providing the staff some direction? My argument is, I don't want staff wasting their time on creating redundant, duplicative regulation. There's plenty of regulation right now. It's not just the Program 4 and Bay Area Air Quality Management District and the county with respect to Valero, but California has the strictest by far regulations for refineries anywhere in the nation, not just ISO related or industrial safety related, but the strictest. I don't think we need to add layer upon layer. I think it's costly. I've said that before, and some people will say to me, it's not costly because Valero's paying for it. It's costly to Valero. Would you feel the same if it was a small company that we're going to ask to pay for it? Just because it's a big company, I think people feel fine saying, well, Valero will take care of that. I don't think it's right. I cannot support it, and we'll see what happens. Again, my expectation is that come November, Valero is going to make good on their commitments, and if they don't, then we're going to be revisiting that, and I'm more than happy to do it at that time, but I'm not willing to have staff work on the ISO between now and that time. So that's where I stand. So I will be voting to not direct staff to, or actually not to have the rehearing on the ISO.
So I will keep this brief. My job, and I took an oath of office for this, is to protect public health and safety. And I believe so firmly in that I am sorry I have irritated council members by asking for a rehearing, but I felt that it didn't get a fair shot at midnight on June 19th, and that it wasn't fair for the public that had sat there for a long time and had a lot to say. So what does the Industrial Safety Ordinance do? It incorporates by reference, and again, the question is having that professional review. That professional review would tell you that it incorporates by reference all existing state statutes, and therefore it's not duplicative. What it does, the difference between the incorporation by the state statute and what the Industrial Safety Ordinance does is say we get a copy of those reports. That's the main difference. So having this discussion about Program 4 and Program 3 and comparing it side by side is not an exercise that you really need to go through, since you already make reference to it's incorporated by reference. The second thing is to institutionalize the promises that Valero has made. So let's talk about a couple of those promises. One is a legal settlement. There shall be community-based air monitors. You heard some testimony from one of the principal leaders on that in Marilyn Bardet. That air monitors were put into mothball for whatever reason I've never been completely clear about. That's a promise that has not been kept. Another promise that has not been kept is the cap. And it has not convened meetings for, I know, well over 9 months. So the reason for industrial safety ordinance is it gives us equal footing with being able to say we have the resources that we can follow through with the promises. And if you believe in the world of government, and our role is to make sure that the public is represented and that we don't have to beg for reports and we don't have to beg for 14 months to have Valero come and address us or any other company, large company, that has some of these issues that we've been talking about. So 2 things. One, institutionalizes, and then provides an ability to afford to participate. So you've heard tonight that staff has been spending time in communication with the refinery, and that's good, but that means they're not doing something else. And as you heard testimony tonight, is we're always short on money. We're always short on things that we can do. So here we are taking our staff with their limited time and our limited resources, and now we're directing it at something that gets no compensation. So that's what the Industrial Safety Ordinance would do. Seat at the table means that, well, we apparently have a plan. It was testified that a plan was submitted to the county. We haven't been asked about that plan. County hasn't had a public hearing since they began the implementation of Program 4. And we also don't have any input, apparently, on the emergency response plan. When we considered the right to know in the late 90s, that was an integral part of right to know, is that we would participate. At this point, it's staff and Valero. The Industrial Safety Ordinance would give us an opportunity to do that, to have public participation. It costs money. It's not easy to do. And again, we would be taking resources away from other needed programs. The ordinance provides the means by which we can include the public. The staff report, the reason I asked for a rehearing is because the staff report did not provide an option, which I requested in my original request, which was to take the draft industrial safety ordinance and send it out for expert review and comment. It could come back and say, you know, you really don't need this. We've looked at this, we've seen the changes in state legislation, we don't see the value of the industrial safety ordinance in Contra Costa County or the city of Richmond. I'm willing to bet they wouldn't say that, but that was the chance I offered, rather than saying, you know, we have to have an industrial safety ordinance. The question was never addressed. There was no mechanism for the council at midnight to say, oh, we have a third option. We can send the draft industrial safety ordinance out for review. That was my request. It wasn't addressed. And that's pretty much what I've asked for on the reconsideration, is if there was a reconsideration, it would be to direct the staff to send this out for professional, expert, public interest review. And I think you would be surprised about the response, keeping in mind that we had testimony from the regional director for Cal OSHA, and he said, you guys need a seat at the table. We had testimony from Cal EPA, and she said, you guys will not get what you need to have to meet the EPA requirements for 5, 6, maybe 10 years, because it's a big state and there are a lot of requirements by other communities. So that was the value of why I thought moving forward on an industrial safety ordinance would be appealing to our council, all of the members that care about our community, and would make sense. And it is basically a common sense approach to something that needs to be addressed. So that's my statement, and I guess I'm looking for a motion for reconsideration. Councilmember Campbell?
I guess you'll figure out what the vote's going to be in a second here. So first thing I want to mention is a little past history that I have with Valero. I've run for office 6 times. Valero has opposed me pretty much 6 times. Sometimes things like the Coalition for Responsible Government, yeah, I do remember some of these things, wasn't real happy with. And so, if anyone up here can hold a grudge against Valero, I probably could at least fit the bill to some degree. And a couple of things that the mayor brought up, the evacuation plan, needed to have the emergency center centered, and an emergency alert system, which I thought actually didn't work that bad, but, it could use some work too. Those are things the city are going to do, period, regardless of ISO. The right to know was one of the things I brought up about, that they basically have to come to a better agreement. We have to be able to get our hands on this material. We can do with it what we want or not do anything with it for that matter, and not have to have it filtered through a third party or wait 14, 15, 16 months to get some of these things. I understand Valero's problem with maybe worrying about legal leaks, and so I do have some issues with that I can understand their concern. But if you give this stuff to the state, there's going to be just likelihood to have leaks as if you give it to us. So anyway, that said, I decided, to sort of put it all on the line and just say, this is the way I view it for Valero. For Valero, this is, it's sort of like, this is your chance to be a part of the community after, 6 months, which actually, in case anyone's forgotten, it's going to be in December. It was 6 months from June 19th is what the motion was. It wasn't in November. You basically got 6 months to do 2 things. If you do them, then as far as I'm concerned, then there may be hope for some sort of less adversarial arrangement to be reached and treat you sort of as a upstanding member of the community, which may sound like an insult, but let's look at what happened in the previous issue with Amports. It said if we do anything, they'll sue us again. They've already got 2 lawsuits against us, so they're basically saying we've taken an adversarial approach, deal with it. So for me, it's Valero, you've got now 5 months, and you either produce or as far as I'm concerned, we just shut the door, and we'll just view it as we'll do what is necessary to protect the community, and it will go from a mutually agreed partnership to one of more like a parental position that I think we'll take up here. I mean, it's just that simple for me. I'm giving you a shot. You do with it what you want with it, but it's one shot and that's the end of it. And as far as kicking this thing down the road and all that, yeah, we could be probably about 3 months closer to solving this issue, not 6 months, because just because we're holding off a little bit, you aren't coming back for 3 months. And if I were staff, if it looks like things are going south, you might want to start looking in that, even if you don't have permission to see where you can fill the holes and avoid redundancies. But if you guys don't come through, you're just gonna have to deal with the ramifications afterwards. But I like to think I could just have gone along with these guys because not exactly there's a whole lot of love lost between us, but I decided to give you a decent shot at it. I know a lot of Valero people, they've been straight up, but the people that actually make the decisions are in San Antonio. Just like I don't really care what's going on in San Antonio, you can see where people in San Antonio they don't necessarily have to care that much about what's going on in Benicia, but the people that I actually have run across in Valero have been pretty straight up with me, so that's the best way I can describe it. I'm just giving you, a decent shot, do with it, what you're going to do with it. And after that, come around December 19th, we'll make the necessary decision after that. That's the way it'll go.
Councilmember Hughes?
I'd like to offer a two-part motion. The first is to deny the request for the rehearing on the ISO. And then the second is to direct staff to revisit Benicia Municipal Code 144.050, which is the rehearing request section, to determine whether it still makes sense or whether it should be more consistent with City Council rules and procedures regarding reconsideration.
So that, to me, would be a two-part process. If you can't, I don't believe from the dais that you can make a motion to give direction to staff to do something that would take more than 15 minutes. Can you clarify that, Ms. McLaughlin?
Whether it would take more than 15 minutes to revise that section of the ordinance? I don't know that it would take that much time to do it. Maybe 15, 20 minutes to write up the staff report. We could use this as a basis.
Just a point of order, if we could. That's not been noticed. We didn't agendize to do anything along those.
Well, that's kind of where I was going. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that you submit that as a two-step process.
Well, let me lean back over to the city attorney. Can that be included in tonight's motion? All I'm asking for is directing the staff to review it, and they can do it at the time that they feel is appropriate. And if there's 3 votes for it, then...
Well, I heard, and maybe the clerk could read it back to me, but what I heard was directing staff to review the ordinance and change it so it matches the council's rules and procedures.
No.
Could you read it back?
What I caught was the denying the request for rehearing and directing staff to revisit the Benicia Municipal Code regarding reconsideration.
Yeah, and what I recall saying is to revisit the code and determine whether it still makes sense and whether it should or should not be more consistent with the council rules and procedures regarding reconsideration. Because right now, the way it stands with the municipal code is that any time anyone can ask for a rehearing. So if somebody doesn't like it, we can just ask for a rehearing. Whereas the reconsideration, which is what we have lived by for the 13 years that close to 13 years I've been on the council, is that in order to ask for reconsideration, you have to be in the majority on the vote.
So since it's not on the agenda, we can, and I would appreciate some city attorney advice on this, I would open up the public comment time because this was not part of the agenda. So this is a new item, and I would think that maybe the public would want to comment on this. I really do not see how you can make this part of the motion of the item that was agendized.
Well, so there's a motion, right? I'd like to second it so I can discuss this.
Well,
Because
it has to have legal sufficiency,
Well, I'm
so
gonna wanna
does the
change
motion
it,
have legal sufficiency?
So on part 2 of the motion, I think we can do that because I don't think it's really going to take more than 15 minutes. The work's already been done in this report, so you can see where the problems are. We just have to repackage it, and that's not going to take any time at all. So I think actually we can do it without any council direction.
Okay. Well, then I will, Mayor?
Sure.
Yeah. So it can be done without direction? Are you saying?
Because I don't need.
you'll be looking at it anyway?
We don't need direction to. Yes, I would love to look at this again. We don't need direction for work that takes less than 15 minutes.
Okay, I'll withdraw the second part of my motion and just go with the denial of the request for rehearing.
well, I'd second that.
Okay, further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Councilmembers Campbell,
Yes.
Hughes,
Yes.
Schwartzman,
Yes.
Young, and Mayor Paterson.
No. Unless there's an objection, the meeting is adjourned.